Welcome to Peak, a growth sport production that explores the power of culture on organizational performance. Music by The Edge. For show notes and more information, visit our website at growth-sport.com. Now here are your hosts, Mary Claire and Dr. Brian.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Mary Claire, and welcome to Peak, the official Growth Sport podcast. Brian. Hello,
Good
Captain.
to be here. Yeah, fun to be back together.
Yeah, it is. It is. Okay, so we're going to take a different path today in terms of our conversation and really dive in on a question that we frequently get when we're talking with leaders. And that is, when do I make the effort and take the time to implement a full system versus focus on improving individual behaviors per se? So we're going to dive into that and help people understand when is a system right versus when to use other tools to attack kind of other behaviors within an organization. So, Brian, let's jump in. First, would you phrase that question differently?
No, I'm excited actually that in this new change, this direction we're taking to address questions that people are posing to us. And as I mentioned in the last podcast, we welcome those. And if you want to send those to us, you can send them to Brian, BRYAN, at growth-sport.com, and we'll try to address them here on our podcast. So I'm excited about this to try to kind of go down these paths. So as you mentioned, we have a lot of leaders that are asking, when is it appropriate for me to go through the upheaval of implementing new process and system? And as you know, that is a heavy lift in a lot of cases. And we'll talk later in this podcast about ways that it might not be so heavy, but it's certainly in the minds, perception is. Yeah, exactly. And most of our leaders are like, that's a year-long thing and it's super hard and I don't really want to do that. But yet at the same time, I have behaviors that I'd like to change. And how do I do that? And do I just address a few people and their behaviors, or do I try to implement these bigger systems and processes that might help everybody's behavior? And I think exactly. Do I really kind of work on the big overarching culture, or do I just work on a few individual people, right?
Yeah.
I think the place to start, Mary Claire, is to remember that as leaders, we're not leading this amorphous thing that we call a company or a nonprofit or some other organization. We're leading people, and we're trying to get people to do the things that are in the best interest of all the other people.
Yeah.
That as a group, that we would move in a direction that would be beneficial to everybody who's a stakeholder, our shareholders, our customers, our donors, whatever the case might be. We want to make sure that we're doing the things that are best for all of those people. So then we have to start thinking about, how do we determine what the right use of our time and our energy is in order to make those changes happen? So in that case, let's look and say, all right, I'm going to start with this situation. I've got a problem. I've got a challenge. What is the problem or challenge I have? Is it a person? Yeah. What's the root? Is it a people problem? Or is it this overarching organizational issue or problem? So I don't know. You've been in this situation. What do you think about this?
It's a both and often. I feel like when I'm working with organizations trying to help them understand what the right next step is, it's often easier to lean to fixing the people problem versus an underlying problem. And I think our job as advisors or coaches or consultants is help them see both sides of the coin. And sometimes, and honestly, sometimes it is, we got to attack this people problem, this person problem, or this whatever problem first, because no matter what system you put in place, it's going to be a problem. Versus the deeper symptom of this individual or these few individuals not operating the way that you would hope is that they don't have the infrastructure under which to do it. They don't have the transparency. They don't have the accountability. They don't have the clarity, which is usually the biggest thing. They don't know where they're supposed to be going. So it's not necessarily an issue of intent or desire or effort. It's an issue of something that really gets to be structural. So
you actually just said the thing I think is the most important. So let's give some real meat here to people to help them. The way that you do this analysis is you look at the person that you think there's a problem, where there's a problem. And the first question you ask is this a will problem or is this a skill problem? Now, even there, to your point, a lot of even the will, sometimes people get discouraged because they can't get where they want to go because of the underlying structure, processes, and systems. But part of this analysis is, would this person perform differently or better if I had given them more resources? And by the way, interestingly, most people, if you ask me what my problem is, I'm rarely going to point to my own deficiencies. I'm going to say, well, I don't have enough, resources, or I don't have enough, leeway or freedom, or whatever the case might be. But in that situation, if you've got some people who are really performing well in a team, and you ask them, like, no, I have the resources. I have what I need. Resources are not the problem. Systems and structure and process are not the problem. Then you can look at your less well-performing people and realize that that is something that is an individual, and you should focus on the individual. If, on the other hand, you're looking across the team and you're finding that everybody is struggling, or that the outcomes are not what you want them to be team-wide, then you've probably got a systems and a process problem, and one that you need to take a step back and say, how do I fix the underlying structure to allow this team to succeed and progress?
Yeah, it reminds me of something that I see frequently, because there is a bridge here. One of the other symptoms we see is that when it's more systematic or structural or process oriented rather than individual, if we keep circling back to the same decisions or the same problems, there's often a bigger process problem at play. So that is one other thing. If I see that in almost every organization I work with, either with growth sport or our own advising or coaching, if we're avoiding, it's the avoidance. And we may not know we're doing it, but we're avoiding a decision, we're avoiding confrontation, we're avoiding the hard questions or the hard conversation. That leads to stagnation. And sometimes a leader needs coaching and needs to buck up, right? It needs to learn how to do that. Other times, a system and process can allow for those conversations or those decisions to be made or that clarity to be created. So that's why I say sometimes, it's often both. It's a people and a process problem. But that's the other symptom I see, is that lack of decision making or the avoidance or the same problems, bubbling up over and over again.
Yeah, actually, two nuggets in what you just said that I really want to highlight. One is this idea that if you're circling back into the same issues over and over again, that's typically not a people issue. Outside of it being your people issue as a leader, it's your issue.
Yeah.
But the point you're not recognizing is that you've got something in your structure that is toxic to the performance that you're striving to achieve. And if it keeps happening over and over, and you can see this, this, we've seen this a lot, where you'll get a leader who will grind through people, like they'll grind through sales leaders. And they don't recognize that it's not the sales leader that's the problem. It's the structure of the organization they've allowed to develop that's the problem. So at the end of the day, because they're the ones who are responsible for that structure, it's the CEO's problem. But what happens is that they've created an environment where the sales leader cannot be successful. And so they just grind through them. They couch it like, I just haven't found the right person. But what's really going on is they haven't created the right structure and the right process. So, that nugget, I think, is really important.
I'm going to use an example I'm living at the moment where we're going to test this theory real quick. So I am dealing with an individual like that. There's growth opportunity there, just like I continue to have growth opportunity in a variety of ways. And there's the churning that's happening through individuals. And I struggle a little bit with, I think this person knows, and I know, and we've talked about, they probably shouldn't be the CEO. They're the founder. They're not an operator in the way that an operator needs to happen, be right with the stage of the company. But they're also not going to bring a CEO on given the stage of the company other than that individual. So there's a chicken and the egg sort of thing here. So I'm trying to say to this individual, you don't want the operating system. You'd want the light version of it or whatever it is you think you're doing, which they're not actually doing. So do I help him find the people that are going to work right for him, given that he's not going to get out of this role? So I've got an interesting scenario of, it's not the right person, but that person's not going to leave. And we're trying to get process in there to some degree. So I'm just curious at your thoughts. This is like a live action situation.
You just brought up one of the most difficult parts of this, which is they don't recognize that the things they hate about leadership and the operating of the organization could be offloaded to process and systems. We don't appreciate.
You don't know how many times I've said that. It's not how their brain works.
I totally get it. And you and I have seen this a lot. And this happens with CEOs where they feel like, No, it's all about me. It's about my personality. It's about my capabilities when they don't recognize that no, systems and processes can be much more efficient and effective
Yeah.
on this. I think that, and you and I have had these experiences where changing people's minds is a very difficult thing to do. But I think the way to do this is to start small and to say to them, look, let's not do an overarching systems change in operation, but to get somebody to work with them. I think if you're trying to match personalities, you'll never
Yeah.
succeed. It's almost impossible. That you just have to go through way too many people to find those rare individuals who can work with these kinds of people. But you might be able to set up a system to say, hey, let's just restructure sales or operations, or what is the most critical part of the organization? Bring in a leader there that you can set process up around and set the boundaries between the founder, CEO, and that leader. Say, this is how it's going to work and operate.
Yeah.
And you spend your time and attention as a consultant at that nexus, at that interface, because you're going to have to smooth over a lot of things. But if you could show that that works, then you could radiate it, then it could grow out a little over time, and the CEO may recognize what works and what doesn't.
So the reason that's helpful, so thank you. But a reason I bring it up is like when and who are the right individuals? When is the right time, and who are the right people type of organization to bring, whether it's
Yeah.
a growth sport or a Six Sigma or whatever it is, into the model. That situation is an example where that CEO is probably not going to adopt it. If I'm the head of sales, it's going to be challenging for me to
Yep.
bring this sort of system in. So you're saying start small, just
Well,
little
start
changes.
small, and that's your best chance with a CEO like this. But one of the counterintuitive realizations that we've made over time is that it's usually your best organizations, or at least a good organization, that recognizes the need for process
Agreed.
improvement
Yep.
and system improvement. And so typically the customers that both do best and succeed with what you're trying to accomplish are those people who recognize that I've done all I can do. I need process and system in
Yeah.
order to move this to the next level. So I'll give you a great example of this. We had some work we did with Verizon, and Verizon had been working for 15 years to improve a time to repair number. And what that means is that how long it took for them to roll a truck to a customer's place to get the problem fixed. And they would track that. And they'd been working for 15 years diligently to try to improve that. And they'd gone through all the things that you and I would recognize. I need different leaders. We need a different person.
Yeah.
We need different team members. We need different trucks. We need different, you name it. They were looking at all the pieces and the parts and how they kind of changed those, looking for that right combination. And after 15 years, they finally brought in a new leader. Again, this next leader who's the next person who's going to make this happen. But that leader had come from another organization that had really effectively used systems and processes. And so this person recognized that this is a systems issue. This is a process issue. We need to figure out how all the parts and the pieces work together in new ways to get different outcomes. And so they started looking about for how they were going to change the way they did their work, not who was going to do the work or what was going to do the work, but the way they were going to do the work. And they brought in a new system, and they overhauled that system. And to our earlier podcasts, it identified what were the right objectives,
Yeah.
what were the right behaviors, who should do what when, what would the relationships look like between those pieces and those parts, and how would we manage all of that? And they implemented this system, and they hit their number in 9 months. So it was just a great example of you can manipulate pieces and parts all day long. And I'm not saying that the pieces and the parts shouldn't be manipulated. There are times when they should be. But if you've manipulated the pieces and the parts a lot and you're not getting the outcomes you want, it's almost always a systems and process problem.
It reminds me of the safety team we worked with, where having the system and the process to just be aware of what it is. Let's all get on the same page of what we should be evaluating and the behaviors we should be utilizing on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, and the information that we need to commit. It was growth sport, and again, you could use other methods, but it was a beautiful way to say, well, how are we measuring safety other than the obvious, somebody not falling off the ladder? But what are the leading indicators to that so that I can avoid somebody falling off the ladder? And then what am I going to do on a week-to-week basis to ensure that we've got the foundation in place and the behaviors in place to hit those leading indicators to ensure that the lagging indicator, nobody's falling off the ladders, right? And it
Yeah.
was just similar. I think they had all the things, but
Had
they
all the
needed to get them.
pieces.
Yeah, they didn't have the process by which to
That's right.
leverage the pieces that they'd
That's
put
right.
together.
There's another great example of this that we saw at the end of the 20th century with Japanese manufacturing. They did this continuous improvement push where that whole idea, I don't know if you were old enough to remember this or not, Mary Claire, but this was the kind of thing where Toyota would say to their line people, you have the ability to stop the line, which was unheard of. GM and Ford never would have done that. But the whole point was, let's change the process and the system to allow us to learn and gain knowledge and information. And we had to change the way the power was structured, the way that people had responsibility, who had accountability. But that change of system and process, which by the way, was not a small thing. It was a
That was an
huge overhaul, right? But look at the impact it's had on automobile manufacturing for decades.
Yeah.
Japanese manufacturers still lead. Toyota still leads. Honda still leads in quality per car. And that culture they created through that changing of the systems and the processes were what made all the difference. The pieces and the parts were no different.
Yeah.
They had all the same equipment and they had all the same things when they made that change. Now, I will suggest that technology and innovation have changed over time in that manufacturing process to the good of those Japanese companies.
Yeah.
And then the US companies tried to mirror and implement similar processes to catch up and to be similar. I think that this natural resistance to systems and process change, I understand because it's a heavy lift. It's the same resistance you get to going and working out at the gym every day. It's hard, but it's what makes the difference.
Yeah. Well, it actually, as we're sitting here chatting and just kind of debate, do I solve for specific people versus system? And I think of even how the sport model or EOS or any of these others, for the most part, start with some level of desired outcome. For us, it's the strategic alignment.
Yep.
Then it's P. It's S and then P. Strategic alignment and then P from a people perspective. So again, and one often sheds light on the other.
You're touching on a real truth though, right? The real truth you're touching on is that systems and process focus is almost always better than individual tinkering with the parts. Unless you are so confident that your system and process is the right one, then you can tinker with the parts at the margin. But if you're always just tinkering with the parts, you're always at the margin.
And you're always in a whirlwind.
You're never at the core.
I think to that end too, when I think about, so we've got the people that we might deal with, also the self as a leader that I might deal with. We talked about, you and I both do coaching and advising. We both received coaching and advising. It's wonderfully valuable because you need somebody to talk to. I always joke like I'm the therapist to CEOs to some degree because you just need somebody to talk to, right? To help make decisions. So there's value in that. And oftentimes system and process helps us be the natural leader that we are or can be because we're not dealing on putting out fires all the time. We can lift our head out and look out and start to lead rather than push from behind or, put out fires and there's a whirlwind or whatever.
That's an awesome insight though too, Mary Claire, right? Because you enable the leader below you to deal with the pieces and parts because you've dealt with the system and the overall process. If you've got the overall system and process in place, then you've empowered your leaders to deal with the pieces and parts to make that system and process work. The confusion, the chaos happens when you don't have either one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've been there and done that. So I've been that person. Okay. So if I kind of bring it up, Brian, and I think of, I'm a leader running an organization. When do I push for more systematic change and cultural change versus attacking the margins? How would you summarize that?
I just summarize simply to say, if you have well-performing teams in some places and not well-performing teams in the other, and you feel that the well-performing teams are adhering to the systems and processes that you think are best for your org, then you've got to tinker with the pieces and parts. The other team needs to be worked on, or parts of that team need to be worked on. But if you're looking across your organization and all you're doing is putting out fires, all you're doing is addressing pieces and parts, and you feel like there's no coherent overarching strategy around or systems and processes around your strategy, then you need to take a step back and restructure and start with that systems and process.
Yeah. And I think you kind of hinted at this earlier. Sometimes that can feel like a lot.
Yeah.
So what's your recommendation for folks as opposed to, you hinted at maybe starting with a team instead of
Yeah, so
starting with
the
board.
good thing about process is you can start small. You can start with your most difficult team. If you're like, hey, we really need to improve X, let's start with that team. You can certainly start there. I do think there's a certain amount of, you have to get comfortable with there being a heavy lift. When we change our behaviors, it takes time and effort. And I get it. I understand that it's hard. But you're also not going to get any different outcomes if you don't do it. You're just going
Yeah.
to keep getting the same thing. And here's the irony. While it feels less difficult to deal with the small pieces and parts, if you really ask yourself and you look back over a period of time, is it really easier? No, you're like, all I deal with are fires. I'm exhausted. I'm burnt out. My people are burned out. We're not getting the outcomes that we want. We're not going where we want to go. That ultimately is more taxing than just taking a step back and starting over and building the process that you need. Yes, it's a lift, but ultimately and ironically, it's less of a lift than just to continue to run into a wall and not get where you want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very well said. At the most basic level, what am I going to do differently to expect a different outcome? And
That's right. I
So,
love that.
yeah. All right, Brian. Well, a pleasure as always, sir. For all of our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like or follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, we hope your drive towards peak performance is successful.
You've been listening to Peak, a Growth Sport production.